In the legal system of each state, cases involving will disputes, elder financial abuse, and breach of fiduciary duty are initially argued in probate and chancery court. These are their stories.
Grandchildren are the apple of their grandparents' eyes, and there are few things that a grandparent would not do for their grandchild. Perhaps that's what makes grandparents such an easy target, and why it takes a proactive and protective team to protect our loved ones from being victimized. In this episode of Wealth and Honor, the case files, a granddaughter knowingly and willfully deceived her 90-year-old grandmother and exerted undue influence to misappropriate her grandmother's assets for her own benefit. But, as this granddaughter quickly learned, neither her aunts and uncles, or the court, were so readily deceived.
Josephine de Anda, born in 1931, is a widow who owned 5 or 6 properties, free and clear. Before the events underlying the instant litigation, she had $240,000 in cash in a credit union account. She was quite self-sufficient, at times living on her own and at other times living with one or another of her 5 children. Lisa Guillen is de Anda's granddaughter, and was employed as a bookkeeper. Guillen had lost a home to foreclosure and told de Anda she was being outbid whenever she tried to buy a new house. Guillen and de Anda then orally agreed to remodel and live together in one of de Anda's homes in Pasadena, the Pasadena home, that had sat vacant for many years. As part of the agreement, Guillen would care for de Anda as she aged. Also agreed was that Guillen would pay for all the costs of the remodel, the bills and utilities. Guillen and de Anda also agreed that Guillen would be allowed to live in the home, indefinitely, or that she would inherit the home entirely when de Anda died. To which of these options the parties specifically agreed was an issue of dispute at trial. Guillen persuaded de Anda that de Anda would not be able to obtain a loan to finance the Pasadena home remodel unless de Anda deeded half the house to Guillen as joint tenants in common with the right of survivorship. Accordingly, de Anda executed a grant deed adding Guillen to the title in April 2013. A year later, Guillen applied for and obtained a loan for approximately $375,000, with she and de Anda listed as co-borrowers. Guillen and de Anda obtained the loan, and in May 2014, the lender issued a check made out to Guillen and de Anda for $358,920.55. Guillen immediately obtained de Anda's signature and deposited the check into an individual account she opened just days earlier. Guillen then went on a spending spree, using funds drawn from the account for vacations to Las Vegas, Palm Springs, Lake Havasu, Temecula, Arizona, Hawaii, the Dominican Republic, and 3 weeks in Italy. It is not clear whether there were funds in the account apart from the construction loan funds. At a minimum, Guillen commingled the loan funds with her other funds. Guillen also used the construction loan proceeds to pay off her personal debt and a prior judgment against her. In addition to the remodel, Guillen was intensely involved in saving a failing business with her mother-in-law. The business was called Taco Factory. Guillen cajoled de Anda into loaning her $30,000 to help save Taco Factory. Guillen later misallocated thousands more of de Anda's money to support Taco Factory, which ultimately went bankrupt in March 2015. Without de Anda's knowledge, Guillen also borrowed $65,000 from Walt Mars for Taco Factory, using the Pasadena home as collateral. Guillen executed a deed of trust on the Pasadena property to Mars, on which Guillen forged de Anda's signature. Guillen ultimately obtained the necessary permits and resumed the remodel. Rather than rehiring the original contractor, Guillen and her then-boyfriend, Jason Smith, an electrician without a contractor's license, took over the construction. At trial, Guillen testified Smith had given her receipts and a weekly accounting of construction expenditures, but Guillen had not kept them. At some point Guillen borrowed $56,000 from Smith to fund the remodel, and executed a deed of trust on the Pasadena home to Smith. The deed was signed by Guillen only, not de Anda. The court surmised that Guillen's end game was to borrow whatever money she could get, to finish the remodeling so she could refinance the entire house to cover all the various loans and debt, while trying to avoid being discovered. The court found substantial evidence that Guillen kept her actions secret, so her aunts and uncles, DeAnda's children, would not know what she was doing. In April 2016, DeAnda's children discovered the Walt Mars trust deed on which Guillen had forged DeAnda's signature. They then checked DeAnda's credit union account and discovered DeAnda's ATM card was missing, as was over $200,000. They further discovered that checks had been written out of DeAnda's Chase bank account, which DeAnda said were forgeries, including one for $26,000. Confronted with these discoveries, Guillen refused to sign the Pasadena home back to DeAnda. DeAnda's children notified the police, who arrested Guillen. Guillen ultimately pleaded guilty to 2 counts arising from the forgery of the Mars grant deed. The trial court found DeAnda had established financial elder abuse, because the evidence showed Guillen wrongfully misappropriated her elderly grandma's monies and interest in real property, with an intent to fraudulently conceal that misappropriation, and by exerting undue influence on her grandmother. The court found Guillen was in material breach of her oral agreement with DeAnda, in particular because Guillen did not pay for the remodel, and DeAnda is forced to repay the loan for the construction. The trial court also found Guillen liable for fraud, based on her forgery convictions and other evidence. The court concluded Guillen also had a fiduciary duty to DeAnda, by way of promises of future care, seizure and distribution of her construction loan monies, and control over her bank and credit union accounts. As such, Guillen clearly owed a duty to disclose material facts concerning her commingling of monies, and manipulation of the Pasadena house interests, and her failure to do so was done with the clear intent to defraud. The court restored title in the Pasadena home to DeAnda alone, and cancelled any deeds bearing Guillen's, Smith's, or Mars's names. Monetary damages were based on stipulations by the parties: $375,000 for the construction loan Guillen failed to repay, $30,000 for the failed business loan, and $13,000 for money Guillen took from DeAnda's credit union account. The total award, therefore, was $418,000, plus interest of $218,250. Of course, the real tragedy here is that a family is left damaged and divided. Lisa, a granddaughter, daughter, and niece within this family, had fallen into the trap of seeing grandmother's money as an easy way out of her own financial problems. Her actions, no doubt, contributed to the declining health of Josephine, who suffered a stroke in 2018 and lives with dementia.